Over the last little while, we have heard a lot of criticism on Dana White and specifically the topic of UFC being more interested in perhaps making money, turning into boxing, things like that. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Today, I wanted to react to a video by HopperoMMA, which is a channel that I absolutely love. If you are not familiar, links will be in the pinned comment description down below if you guys want to see. He made this video. The UFC are slowly turning into boxing. I watched about a quarter of it, halfway, I don't really recall, and I loved it, thought it would make for a perfect reaction video, and that's what we're going to react to today. Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. If you're new here, my name is Kyle. I'm your guy with too many YouTube channels. Let's react to this video together. The UFC are slowly turning into boxing.
So fellas, the UFC have always branded themselves as being the best versus the best. They've always branded themselves as being a company that shows the best fighters in the world facing the best fighters, the #1 undeniable contender facing the other best fighters. Unlike boxing, where we were seeing fights like Fury versus Chisora and Joshua versus Hellenius, and it just wasn't that. It was the best in the world facing a guy that shouldn't be in there with them.
And the UFC was always really good at actually having the best versus the best. But now, like, look at these conversations at the time of recording this video. Apparently, there are talks for Alex Pereira to fight Khamzat Chimaev. Is that the best of the best? Is that Alex Pereira taking on the #1 contender? Even if we want to talk about Alex Pereira going to fight Jon Jones, Jon Jones taking on Stipe Miocic. Things like this is what's ruining the integrity of the UFC.
And that only kind of got changed when the Saudis came in and the Saudis started paying the big money, and it kind of got changed around. But I feel like recently in the UFC, we've seen a big wave of the best fighters not really facing the best. I mean, if we look at all the champions right now in the UFC as of right now, there's a situation in 3 different weight classes where it isn't really the best versus the best. I mean,
yeah, and at the time now, like, he made this video a little bit ago, but Merab was really trying not to fight Umar Nurmagomedov.
Got Merab, who's basically outright refusing to face Umar Nurmagomedov. And for all those people complaining that saying Umar isn't next, he's only got 1 ranked win. When your ranked win is Corey Sandhagen, and you've done it in impressive fashion as well, I think it's pretty undeniable that Nurmagomedov's next. And
I will say, while I am not upset about Umar getting the title at all, Petr Yan also went on to get a fantastic win. He deserves it more than Umar. But I'm not one of those guys that's sitting here and saying that Umar doesn't deserve a title fight.
Yeah, Merab's basically said he doesn't want to fight Umar. He wants to fight Petr Yan instead. And I think even as an MMA fan with the 2-fight winning streak that Yan's on, why would you want to see this fight? We've seen this fight before back in 2023, early 2023, like a year and a half ago. And it was one of the most dominating performances in bantamweight history from Merab. It wasn't even...
I would like to see if Petr Yan would ever actually be able to come back from that, but the problem is, I'm more for just somebody who's more deserving, and Petr Yan, with the wins that he has gotten and the quality of those wins and how he's looked in those wins, are more deserving than Umar Nurmagomedov to get a title fight. But I do understand what Hoppero is saying.
Even a close fight. It wasn't like a Sterling versus Yan situation where it was really close. This was pure domination from Merab, and I don't see why it'd be any different this time around. I have no interest in that matchup, and I know there's also the excuse that Nurmagomedov has said that he doesn't want to fight in Ramadan, so he's not going to be able to make UFC 313, but I kind of find it ironic how the second that Nurmagomedov's not available, Merab's now said he's definitely wanted to fight at UFC 3.
That's true. We know Merab absolutely did not want to fight Umar Nurmagomedov, and this, don't get me wrong, like, the point of this video definitely still stands. Merab did not want to fight Umar. It seems like the UFC is just straight up making him.
13, and even in the Octagon interview with Joe Rogan, he didn't want to mention Nurmagomedov's name. And then you go to the heavyweight division. I'm not going to talk about this too much because I've been talking about it leading up to the Jones fight, but Tom Aspinall, undeniable #1 contender, he's looking straight past Tom Aspinall to fight Stipe, who is 42 years old.
And now that he beats Stipe, he wants to fight Alex Pereira. And you know what? I still hate it, man. Every single time we talk about this, I still hate it. Jon Jones, if you're a fan of Jon Jones, he thinks you're so stupid. It's like, I don't know, I'm just looking for the better name of my legacy. I think that Alex Pereira would be a good fight. Like, he thinks you are an idiot.
Even now, after the Stipe fight, he's been saying he wants to fight like Derek Lewis.
Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah, Jamal Hill he wants to take on. I don't remember him saying anything about Derek Lewis, but I remember him talking about Jamal Hill. Like, come on, John, man.
Jamal Hill, which makes no sense at all. And he's holding up the heavyweight division just so he doesn't have to fight Tom Aspinall. He even said he wants to vacate the belt. And then even Poaton, there's a situation where Poaton might not be fighting the best in Ankalaev. Now, I don't think this is Alex Pereira's fault because he has said before that he would fight Ankalaev. I think this is more the UFC trying to push this fight away.
We've just recently talked about this in the video, so I won't really spend time on it, but Alex Pereira did just confirm, unless, like, for whatever reason he's joking, which would be a horrible joke, but he did post that he is not fighting Magomed Ankalaev next, and Magomed Ankalaev just posted back and called him a chicken.
When this fight was ready and should have been made, they ended up doing Khalil Roundtree versus Pereira and Rakic versus Ankalaev, which didn't really make sense at the time. And now there's a lot of talk of Poaton going into the heavyweight division after Jones and Aspinall after they settle the thing without Pereira actually end up fighting Ankalaev. And even in the flyweight division, this isn't as bad, and it's not the UFC's fault, but there isn't even a #1 contender in the flyweight division. There's not that one best fighter. They've had to bring...
I don't know. You think? I think it might be Brandon. It's got to be Moreno, right? It's got to be. It has to be.
Kai Asakura into the UFC to solve that issue. And if we look at every UFC pay-per-view so far in 2024, it's been quite a common occurrence where it hasn't been the best fighter facing the best. And we're going to go...
That's an interesting point. Did he say he's going to go over it?
A few examples. I said I'm not going to talk about it too much, but recently, UFC 309, the most recent pay-per-view, got 42-year-old, 4 years out, KO'd in his last Stipe Miocic.
Yeah, just to keep Jon Jones, just to keep him as a champion and do whatever Jon Jones wants.
Instead of the interim champion with a defense, not only the champion, but with a defense, Tom Aspinall, shortest average fight time, undefeated in the UFC, 31, the list goes on. And it kind of showed in the fight, was it the best versus the best? No, it wasn't. What happened?
Stipe did not belong in there at all. He did not belong in the cage. He did not care. He was just there to get Jon Jones a win.
Was exactly what we expected. Jones took down, dominated Stipe for the first round. Second round and the third round just picked him apart on the feet, and then eventually got the finish over Stipe, who looked...
And I'm shocked, by the way. I'm shocked that Stipe lasted as long as he did.
Like he should not be nowhere near a title fight. So that was not the best versus the best. The reality is, we ended up seeing the 8th best in the world versus Jon Jones, when we should have been seeing Tom Aspinall versus Jones, which was the best versus the best, and the UFC had the ability to do that.
And one of the biggest fights of all time as well. Like, how much you got to protect Jon Jones. Like, it's things like this that make me think, like, he really does have dirt on Dana. Like, that's crazy.
After Jones and Stipe, well, after the first Jones and Stipe fight got cancelled and Aspinall beat Pavlovich, but instead they were hell-bent on the fight with Jones and Stipe, and it wasn't the best versus the best. UFC 307 is another example. Alex Pereira versus Khalil Roundtree. Now, Khalil Roundtree did really good in this fight. He did better than a lot of people expected. Did better than a lot of light heavyweights as well. Obviously, he inevitably ended up getting finished by Porton, but he still did really well. But at the time of getting the title shot, he was number 8th ranked in the division.
Yeah, there was no way he deserved a title fight. Especially, like, you want to talk about Magomed Ankalaev, there was no way he deserved one over Magomed Ankalaev in general.
And he was coming off a win of Anthony Smith. If you look at the comment...
Yeah, okay, but come on. Let's be real for a second. Let's be real. If you're talking about Anthony Smith, and you break down Alex Pereira, if you put Alex Pereira in the octagon and you just take away his kickboxing, he's not really all that good. And Anthony Smith would beat him if that's the case. On paper, Anthony Smith would beat Alex Pereira if you took away Alex Pereira's kickboxing. Then Anthony Smith would beat Alex Pereira. So a win over Anthony Smith should mean that you deserve a title fight. Let's be real here.
It's on Instagram and Twitter when this fight first got announced. A lot of people are disagreeing, saying it was a mismatch. And Ankalaev was ready at the time. He was ready to fight. He was the #1 in the weight class. He's already beaten 4 ranked fighters at the time. And he was coming off a KO win over Johnny Walker. This was the fight to make. I mean, it's still the fight to make now. But I would have thought that this would have been the route the UFC would have done after Alex Pereira versus Yuri Prochazka 2 in the rematch at 303.
That's what they should have done. But either the UFC is protecting him, Alex Pereira doesn't want to fight him, or the UFC thinks Magomed Ankalaev would be a boring champion. I don't know what the case is. There's a million reasons why that could be.
So was this the best versus the best? No, it wasn't. The best versus the best, which we're still yet to see, is Ankalaev versus Porton. And the reality is, even though Roundtree did a really good chance at the time, it was not the best versus the best. I mean, Roundtree wasn't even in the top 5 at the time of getting a title shot, and he still isn't, to be fair.
And Ankalaev, yeah, like, it's a horrible title fight. By the way, while I have the video paused, Hoppero, if you ever end up watching this video, first of all, I love your content. Thank you very much for making it. What is this song? I would love to use it in one of my other channels sometime.
Go back to UFC 305, Dricus du Plessis versus Israel Adesanya. When Israel Adesanya got his title shot, his last 3 fights was him getting finished by Alex Pereira, him finishing Porton back in a massive knockout, and then him...
And even then, in the Porton fight, he was losing the first round. Was that 1 round or 2? Why am I having a blank on that? Regardless, he was losing the majority of the fight.
Getting absolutely dog-walked by Sean Strickland. He then ends up taking a year off, being inactive for an entire year while the division moves on. And then gets an immediate title shot instead of Sean Strickland, who was on a winning streak, then goes out there and dog-walks Adesanya, one of the biggest upsets in UFC history, to become the middleweight champion.
And not only that, you had guys like Imavov, you have Brendan Allen, and Hamzat Chimaev in there.
Then has a very close competitive fight.
Hang on, why does Bruce Buffer look AI there?
With Dricus du Plessis, which could have gone either way. Then at UFC 301, I think it was, or 302, then goes out there and absolutely boxes the head off. Well, maybe not box the head off, but goes out there and beats Paulo Costa in a decision. And then we end up seeing Adesanya versus Dricus du Plessis. Was it the best versus the best? And now I will say, I did want to see this fight. I wasn't totally against this fight because of the build-up, the whole Africa thing they've got going on, the fact that it was going to be a good build-up. They were trash-talking each other way before.
Look at that, though, man. Look at du Plessis looking at him like, dude, are you really crying right now? Look at him. Dude, I love Duplessis. I love him.
What the fight was even announced, but it wasn't really the best versus the best. The best versus the best at the time, if we're being honest, would have been a Strickland rematch against Dricus Duplessis.
And even then, you had contenders that weren't losing. Imavov, Brendan Allen, and I know that you could argue, like, are they really better than Israel Adesanya? But you also, excuse me, you also had Hamzat Chimaev. If you really want to go there, he's proven himself. Robert Whittaker deserved a title fight more than anybody.
Obviously, I'm not saying that's nowadays, because now that Chimaev's come into the division, but at the time it was. And in the reality, Adesanya, coming off a dominant loss, taking a year out, got a title shot. It wasn't as bad as Jones versus Stipe, but it still wasn't the best versus best. UFC 301 early this year, Pantoja versus Steve Erceg. Steve Erceg coming into the title shot, had 3 wins in the UFC.
To be fair, those were majorly impressive wins, and Pantoja has also cleared out the division. So that one, I wouldn't really blame the UFC too much for.
Finish. That's all he had. I don't even think he was in the top 10 at the time, and he managed to get a title shot from that against Pantoja, the defending champion. Now, I will say there wasn't like an outright #1 contender in the division, but if the UFC were smart, they would have changed the matchmaking. I mean, they had Albazi on the come up, they had Makayev on the come up, they had Royval. They could have done like Royval versus Makayev for a #1 contender matchup, or Makayev versus Albazi, or even like a Tatsuro Taira versus Albazi, like 2 up-and-coming guys. The winner gets a title shot. So it's
yeah, those would have all worked. Honestly, did they ever say why Steve Erceg ended up getting a title fight? Because all of those definitely, they do make more sense. Huh, that's strange. Regardless, Steve Erceg, in my opinion, didn't even win that fight, so ended up working out. Like the flyweight one, I'm willing to say, okay, UFC, that's fine, but this still is proving Hoppero's point.
It's not just the same guys over again. And then we ended up seeing Steve Erceg and Pantoja, and again, even though Steve Erceg did really well, did better than a lot of people expected, some people even thought he won the fight, he did end up losing.
I thought he won the fight. I gave him 3 rounds. I thought it was a robbery.
Pantoja got the win against a guy that on paper shouldn't have been in there with him, and ironically after this, Steve Erceg faced another contender in Kaka.
Oh no, his face. Oh, man, Steve Erceg. That's still shocking, by the way. I'm surprised that Kai Kara-France won that fight.
France, and ended up getting put to sleep early on. So, was Steve Erceg the best at the time in the flyweight division? No, he wasn't. I'm not saying he didn't have a good performance. I'm not saying he had no business being in there with Pantoja, but at the time, he wasn't the best. It wasn't the best versus the best.
I think that's actually very well said. I think that's perfectly said for Steve Erceg, and like the whole situation revolving around him. Also, man, I'm looking at all the photos now, man. Kai Kara-France, his forehead, oh my God. Look at the size of that thing.
It could have been a Tatsuro Taira. It could have...
Sorry, you have Kai Kara-France with the massive forehead. You have Amir Albazi with the tiny forehead.
Could have been a Royval. Could have been a... not a Royval, but a Kai Kara-France maybe. A Makayev, an Albazi. But Steve Erceg was the reality. So again, wasn't the best versus the best. UFC 299. O'Malley versus Marlon Vera 2. Now, I can kind of understand why the UFC made this matchup. They fought before. Marlon Vera has a win over Sean O'Malley, but come on, you're reaching a bit there. It was an injury win over Sean O'Malley.
I think he was doing... At the end of the day, like, Cheeto did get the win. He looked good. Cheeto's the one who ended up causing that damage, so I don't want to take away from that win, but I do understand what you guys are talking about. Regardless, this one is one of the worst. No, Jon Jones is the worst. Jon Jones is the worst, but come on, like, out of all of the contenders to choose from, Cheeto Vera.
Sean O'Malley obviously injured his ankle, and this was a really undeserved title shot, though, because if you look at if you look at Marlon Vera and compare him to Corey Sandhagen, Marlon Vera had lost to Corey Sandhagen in a pretty dominant decision. It says split decision, but it shouldn't have been that. That was a robbery, even though he lost the fight. And a win over Pedro Munoz. That was his case, going into a title fight with Sean O'Malley. And then you've got Corey Sandhagen, who had dominantly beat Marlon Vera. Should have been a unanimous decision.
Yeah, could you imagine, like, oh my, that, I don't know. If there's ever a time to talk about the judges needing to be investigated, this is the time.
And then goes out there and beats Rob Font on top of that on short notice. And they still end up giving the title shot to Marlon Vera despite losing to Sandhagen, and Sandhagen only getting a win from there.
Yeah, the UFC, just like Jon Jones, they're protecting Sean O'Malley. They're protecting Sean O'Malley, and Sean O'Malley also doesn't want to take on... Like, I mean, I can never really blame these guys, to be honest with you. As Uncle Chael always says, he ends up talking... I can't remember exactly the wording that he uses, I'm paraphrasing, but you want to take the easiest fight for the most attention and the most amount of money. You can't blame Sean O'Malley for wanting Cheeto Vera. You can't blame Jon Jones for wanting Stipe Miocic. It's the incorrect thing to do.
And I think the UFC were very smart with the matchmaking, because they knew that if they'd have done Marlon Vera versus PTN, Marlon Vera would have got outboxed. If they did Marlon Vera versus Cejudo or Merab, he would have got absolutely mauled because his grappling's terrible. And even if they did him versus Figueiredo, I mean, we all saw that how that went down at UFC Abu Dhabi. Figueiredo beating comfortably, and if it was him versus Sandhagen, again, we've already seen the fight, Sandhagen beating comfortably. So the UFC were very careful with their matchmaking by giving him Pedro Munoz, basically a washed journeyman.
Oh, the disrespect for Pedro Munoz, man. I actually don't think that Pedro Munoz washed. I don't, but he is well past his prime. It's unfortunate, man. It's unfortunate. One of my favorite fighters. It hurts to see. Pedro Munoz, come on.
For a title shot. I mean, in hindsight, that was terrible. Getting a title shot by beating Pedro Munoz, who nowadays isn't even ranked. And the fight showed it. Marlon Vera got his ass absolutely whooped. I mean, Sean O'Malley was beating the brakes off Marlon Vera the entire fight. It wasn't even a competitive fight. Sean O'Malley absolutely dominated him. One of the most dominating title performances we've seen this year. Made him look like the dude from Home Alone after.
Oh, no. Oh, my God. Hang on.
Dominated him. One of the most dominating title performances we've seen this year. Made him look...
Oh, my God. He actually does look like that. And, of course, my camera's blocking it. Hey, let me choose another scene for you guys. Sorry. How about this? Does that make it better? There. Yeah, it's a little bit better. Look at that. Oh, my God. Wow, dude.
Like the dude from Home Alone after. So was this the best versus the best? No, it wasn't. Marlon Vera was not the best contender at the time. He's not even top 5 in the world right now. So to say that he got a title shot this year is still crazy. It should have been Sandhagen versus O'Malley. Sandhagen was on a winning streak. He beat Marlon Vera, then he beat Rob Font. And even though Rob Font might not be the most urgent win, first of all, it was on short notice and he just beat the guy who was challenging for a belt in Marlon Vera. That should have been the fight, but somehow Marlon Vera finessed a title shot. And that's not even to mention all the other losses he has before Sandhagen as well.
Yeah, he absolutely did not deserve that title fight. He is one of, and it's shocking to me that he's still ranked as highly as he is, because I think that Cheeto at this point would probably lose to a lot of people, like even barely outside the rankings. I'm thinking like a Jonathan Martinez matchup, who he's just right outside the rankings, right? I don't believe he's ranked, but he'd probably beat Cheeto Vera at this point.
So if we actually look at all the pay-per-views this year, there's only been a few pay-per-views that are the best versus the best, and there's even more pay-per-views that you can kind of break down than all.
Hang on. My face is covering Makhachev versus Poirier. That's not the best versus the best. Poirier versus Holloway is the best of the best. UFC 300, Pereira versus Hill. Depends how you look at Jamal Hill. Noche UFC, yes. UFC 298, yes. Strickland Duplessis, yes. Edwards Muhammad, yes. Pereira versus Prohashka, yes. So you could knock out 2 more, arguably.
That it wasn't the best versus the best. Porton versus Yuri Prohaska, it was short notice. I'm not saying it shouldn't have gone down. It was a great fight on paper going into it, but that was only made because Chandler and McGregor ended up getting cancelled and they needed a quick replacement, so those were the only 2 guys that called up. And Dustin Poirier versus Makhachev, again, I'm not saying it shouldn't have happened at the time. It made sense at the time, but Poirier wasn't the best in the world. The best.
Yeah, you had both of these fighters. It was just a feel-good. Everybody wanted Dustin Poirier to get the title win, right?
World would have been the winner of Oliveira and Sarukian, where Sarukian managed to get a pretty good win over Charles Oliveira in a competitive fight at UFC 300. And the only reason he didn't fight for the belt at the time is because it was, far too quick of a turnaround, because he fought at 300. Coming back at 302 to fight Makhachev wouldn't have been the smart idea. So if you really look at it, there was only a handful.
Sorry about that, guys. I didn't know that he was going to get into this. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I only watched like a quarter way, somewhere between quarter way and halfway through the video to decide that this would make for a good reaction video. I did not know that he was going to get into this. This is arguably what is left for the best versus the best, and that's actually crazy when you put it into perspective.
Of pay-per-views this year with main events that was actually the best versus the best. In fact, only 6 out of 13 events that took place in 2024 was the best fighter versus the best fighter. And even UFC 296, the last pay-per-view of 2023, you've got Edwards versus Covington.
I never even thought about that. I forgot about that one. Yeah, Edwards versus Covington was absolutely not the best one.
I mean, the number 1 contender fight was Belal Muhammad versus Gilbert Burns, which took place way before Edwards versus Covington took place. Belal Muhammad, he'd beaten Sean Brady, he'd beaten Stephen Thompson, Vicente Luque, Damian Maia. Gilbert Burns had beaten Masvidal and Neo Magny coming into this. Belal Muhammad gets a very comfortable decision. You can say what you want, but he got the win. Colby Covington was coming off a loss to Kamaru Usman and a win over Jorge Masvidal in early 2022.
Yeah, and that was one of the most undeserved title fights we've ever seen in the history of the sport. And that's coming from somebody who likes Colby.
21 months before the title fight. And I know there's going to be people that complain saying the UFC are an entertainment business. It's about...
Yeah, but the problem is they always advertise themselves to be the best versus the best. And that's something that they actually used to live by.
Colby Covington isn't entertaining. He's so overrated when it comes to entertainment. His fight with Leon was so boring. In fact, I'd argue that Bilal's fight with Leon might have been more interesting. I mean,
I don't know if I agree with that one. I personally find enjoyment in watching all aspects of martial arts. I understand that's you're gonna look at that and you're gonna be like, oh my god, that's such a you want to be a hardcore fan. You want to be really hardcore. No, I enjoy all the martial arts. It's why One Championship's my favorite promotion. I like watching the grappling, the Muay Thai. I like mixing in the MMA together. I don't care if somebody gets a wrestling decision when it's somebody like Colby. And Colby in his prime, by the way. Colby in his prime, in my opinion, was exciting to watch because it was constant, relentless, spam takedowns, beat you down. Bilal Muhammad is more of a holder. I know he's changed that in recent times, but yeah, I don't know if I agree with that one.
At least he actually tried to push in a pace and going for the win. So, you know, Colby Covington, same thing happened. Faced Leon when he shouldn't have been in there. And he ended up losing the fight as we all expected. So was this the best versus the best? It wasn't. And I'm seeing a bit of a pattern here as well. There's a bit of an ironic theme that every fighter that doesn't really deserve a title shot ends up losing. Every fighter from Colby to all the fighters in 2024 that shouldn't have been in there didn't end up winning the fight. And if you
Wow, that's shocking. You didn't put the best versus the best, and then the one who is actually should be in the best versus best fight came out with the win? Really? Really?
I want to include Yuri and Poirier as well for the circumstances that they were in. They didn't end up winning either, so it's a bit of a theme that we're seeing. And when you do see the best versus the best in fights like Holloway versus Topuria and Makhachev versus Volk and Makhachev versus Oliveira, the build-ups to these fights have way more hype, and the fights tend to be better. We're seeing these vicious finishes, we're seeing these extremely high-level matchups, these fights between the best versus the best that are super technical and just super fun to watch as a fan. And how I would personally solve this issue is, first of all, the UFC they've got to get rid of this whole nostalgia bias.
Okay, actually, I was gonna mention that, but I'm gonna hear him out before I talk about that.
Adesanya, he might have been a former champion. That doesn't mean he should be fighting for a belt in 2024. Stipe Miocic, yes, he's the greatest of all time.
I see where he's going with that. Yeah, at the end of the day, you could just say that they need to start doing the best versus the best again. Why? It doesn't matter. Like, I never really understood everybody talking about, and Jon Jones would talk about that, Dana White would talk about that too. Well, Stipe's a legend. Stipe can do what he wants. Why? I get, like, having respect for your legends, but why should somebody who's been out since 2021 and losing get a title fight? It just does not make sense. And then they come back, well, what about everything that Stipe's done for the heavyweight division? What about all of the current active #1 contenders? What about the actual interim champion who's putting in the work right now? It doesn't compare. Yeah, nostalgia bias is a good way to put it.
That means he should be fighting for the undisputed belt in 2024. No, it doesn't. Colby Covington, fair enough. He's a promoter. You know, he's a promoter's dream. Used to be a big star. Shouldn't be fighting for a belt in 2020 or late 2023. So you've got to get rid of the nostalgia bias. Like, if we see Usman get a title shot in 2025 after the past couple of fights that he's had, even though
I can't remember who was just wanting to fight Usman too at like the time of this video is being posted. Usman was talking about fighting somebody, or somebody wanted to fight Kamaru Usman, and Usman said that he's not doing that. So could you imagine?
Had a great career in the welterweight division. He shouldn't be anywhere near a belt. Have multiple top contenders as well. The welterweight are doing a really good job at this. The welterweight division has a really good job. You've got the likes of Shavkat versus Ian Gary for a #1 contender fight. You've got Covington and Buckley, which you can only expect is going to be some sort of #1 contender fight.
There's a lot of people that are doing really well at the top right now.
You've also got JDM. You've got Sean Brady. You've got Leon Edwards, who's still in the mix. You've got a lot of top contenders in the welterweight division, so you don't have to worry about the wrong guy getting a title shot.
But the problem with that is that something you can really control? I don't know. I'd have to sit and think about that one.
Whereas the flyweight division, there isn't even a single contender. You've got Royval at #1, who's already 0-2 against Pantoja and 1-1 against Moreno. You've got Kai Kara France, who, yes, he's coming off a win, but he's lost to Albazi, Pantoja, Moreno, and Royval. You've got Brandon Moreno as well, who's coming off a win, but he's 0-3 against Pantoja if you count the Ultimate Fighter.
Yeah, that's a problem with Pantoja specifically. I don't know. Can the UFC even fix that one? They tried to fix it with Kai Asakura, but is that even a solution? I don't know, man. I don't know.
And he literally lost to Royval as well this year. So you've got to have multiple top contenders, in my opinion, and just give the rightful contender their title shot. But even if it's a boring guy, just stack the card.
I like that. No matter what, you can put good fights on. There's a lot of cards, too, without a bunch of, you need at least a co-main event with name value, and you can find that. If you have a boring title fight, you can absolutely make a massive fight in the co-main event, and it's probably easier than making a massive title fight.
Conor O'Malley be fighting Merab next, even though he would sell more pay-per-views than Nurmagomedov. No, he shouldn't. You should give the title shot to Nurmagomedov. Just stack the card. Should Ankalaev be fighting Porton next? Yes, he should. Porton should have to wait before he goes to the heavyweight division. As much as I'd want to see Porton fight the likes of Jon Jones and Aspinall, obviously after their fight, I want to see him face Ankalaev first. So we've got to give the rightful guy their title shot. And if
it's the right thing to do. If you're trying to be taken seriously as a sport and advertise yourself to be the best of the best, this is the absolute right thing to do. And if you want to talk about the argument of doing this would sell more pay-per-views, I'm sure there's other ways, like talking about stacking the card or even making a really good co-main event and a really good featured fight and getting into press conferences again, by the way. I'm sure that brings a lot of buys, but it's just the right thing to do, and it can be solved. You can make just as much money.
If you don't think it's going to sell pay-per-views and there's better alternatives, just stack the card, because at the end of the day, you're going to have to give them the title shot eventually. So that is, in my opinion, the problem with the UFC, with the best not fighting the best, and it's kind of losing the whole model of being the best versus the best. Let me know your thoughts on this topic, if you agree, disagree, and your own personal thoughts.
Yeah, man. It's unfortunate, man, because I unfortunately agree with this. The UFC is entering a state where it's no longer the best versus the best. I would love to know what you guys think about this down below. Check out HopperoMMA. I love this channel. I watch him all the time. Makes great UFC content. You can check that out in the pinned comment description down below. But in the meantime, if you've already seen Hoppero's content, then why don't you check out this video on screen right now, talking about my top 25 favorite fighters of all time. I would love to have you guys over there. Thank you for watching.